A saleswoman humiliated and punched a black girl in a toy store, not knowing her father is Snoop Dogg. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching us from. Corey Broadus stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair into neat braids, her fingers moving with practiced ease. The 12-year-old girl wore her favorite pink hoodie, slightly oversized with sparkling rhinestones spelling out "Dream Big" across the chest. Her reflection smiled back at her, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes, one she quickly shook off. Today wasn't a day for doubts. Today was about making dreams come true. Downstairs, the smell of pancakes and maple syrup wafted through the house. Her father, the one and only Snoop Dogg, was already at the stove, flipping golden brown pancakes with a practiced flair. Music played softly from a speaker in the corner, the smooth rhythm of an old-school R&B track filling the kitchen. "Morning, superstar," he greeted her, tossing a pancake onto a plate like it was a trick shot. "Ready to make history today?" Corey grinned. "You bet I am." She slid into her chair and poured syrup onto her pancakes. Her dad watched her with an amused look, his signature braids tucked neatly under a bandana. He leaned against the counter, his tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves. "So, tell me again," he said. "What's the plan? What's this amazing gift you've got cooked up for your bestie?" Corey chewed thoughtfully before answering. "I want to get her a doll that looks just like her. Not one of those basic ones. They all look the same. I mean, something special. Something that'll make her feel seen." Snoop raised an eyebrow. "Seen?" "Yeah. You know how she's always saying she can never find dolls that look like her, with her skin tone, her hair. She always ends up with something that doesn't feel right." Her father nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I hear you, baby girl. You're thinking deeper than most kids your age. But I like that about you." Corey's eyes lit up. "So, we're going to that big toy store downtown, the one with the huge glass windows and the golden doors. I've been saving up my allowance forever. This is going to be perfect." Snoop smiled and ruffled her hair. "You got taste, kid, but you sure they'll have what you're looking for?" "They have to," Corey said firmly, as if saying it out loud would make it true. Breakfast turned into a brainstorming session about what kind of doll might fit the bill. They joked about accessories, tiny purses, glittery shoes, and maybe even a mini microphone so the doll could sing just like Corey's best friend dreamed of doing one day. But underneath the laughter, Corey's excitement was mixed with an unspoken fear. She didn't want to admit it out loud, but the store intimidated her. It was the kind of place where everyone dressed up just to shop, and people like her, young black girls in sneakers and hoodies, were often ignored or worse, judged. By the time they left the house, Corey had convinced herself that this wasn't about her. It was about her friend, and nothing was going to ruin that. The ride downtown was filled with chatter and music. Snoop cracked jokes about the traffic, turning even the most mundane moments into something fun. When they finally pulled up in front of the store, Corey's heart skipped a beat. The building loomed above her, all glass and gold, like something out of a fairy tale. She stepped out of the car and smoothed her hoodie, trying to shake off the nervous energy bubbling inside her. "Go get 'em, superstar," Snoop said, giving her a fist bump. "I'll be right here if you need me." She took a deep breath and pushed through the heavy glass doors. Inside, the store was a symphony of color and light. Dolls lined the walls and glass cases, their perfect faces staring out like porcelain princesses. Shelves overflowed with stuffed animals, toy cars, and shimmering costumes. Classical music played softly in the background, and everything smelled faintly of vanilla and polished wood. Corey felt her steps slow. She'd imagined this place so many times, but being here felt different. The salespeople moved with crisp efficiency, their eyes scanning the room like security cameras. She forced herself to stand tall and marched toward the doll section, ignoring the eyes that seemed to follow her. She spotted the perfect doll almost immediately, a beautiful figure with dark skin, braided hair, and a shimmering dress that reminded Corey of her best friend's favorite outfit. Excitement surged through her, but as she reached out to pick up the doll, a shadow fell across her. "Can I help you?" The voice was sharp and cold, and when Corey turned, she saw the woman who owned it. The name tag read Miss Harper. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her tailored suit looked like it belonged in a boardroom, not a toy store. "I was just looking at this doll," Corey said, trying to keep her voice steady. Miss Harper gave her a long, slow glance that seemed to weigh every part of her: her hoodie, her sneakers, her braids. "That's part of our premium collection," she said. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" The words hit Corey like a slap. I have money," she stammered. "I can pay for it." Miss Harper didn't even blink. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the clearance aisle. Over there." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the store, where shelves sagged under outdated toys and forgotten bargains. Corey felt heat rise to her cheeks. "No," she said firmly. "I want this one." Miss Harper's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid that's not an option." Corey's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream, to shout that she deserved to be here just as much as anyone else. But before she could say anything, Miss Harper turned and walked away. The moment hung in the air, heavy and painful. Corey looked down at the doll and swallowed the lump in her throat. She wouldn't let this ruin everything. She reached for the doll again, but before she could grab it, Miss Harper returned, this time with another salesperson. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice sharper now. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Corey froze. "What? Why?" Miss Harper folded her arms. "You don't belong here." The words echoed in Corey's ears. Her dream of finding the perfect gift shattered in an instant. She blinked back tears and turned, stumbling toward the exit, her heart pounding. Outside, the world felt too bright, too loud. She pulled out her phone and dialed her dad's number with trembling fingers. "Daddy?" Her voice cracked. "Can you come inside, please?" The call ended, and Corey stood there, hugging herself as the glass doors reflected her tear-streaked face. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. Corey stood outside the toy store, the cool afternoon breeze brushing against her tear-streaked face. The city buzzed around her, indifferent to the storm brewing inside her chest. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing, but the weight of Miss Harper's words lingered like a stain she couldn't scrub away. The doll had been perfect. Everything she had dreamed of finding for her best friend. But instead of joy, the encounter had left her feeling small, like she didn't belong. She wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her hoodie and stared at the golden letters etched above the glass doors. The store's grandeur now seemed mocking, a fortress built to keep people like her out. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw her father's name flashing across the screen. "I'm here," he said. "I'm coming in." Relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by the gnawing sense that she'd failed, not just herself, but her friend. She had promised to find the perfect gift, and now she was leaving empty-handed. Worse, she had let someone make her feel less than what she knew she was. Before she could spiral further, the glass doors opened, and Snoop Dogg stepped inside the store. Heads turned immediately. He carried himself with effortless confidence, his sharp suit and sunglasses adding to the commanding presence that had made him a household name. But today, Corey didn't care about the attention he drew. All she cared about was the way his eyes softened when they met hers. He didn't say anything at first. He just knelt in front of her, scanning her face as if to read everything she was too scared to say out loud. "Let's go," he said, taking her hand. They re-entered the store together, but the air felt different this time. Corey felt stronger with her father beside her, yet a flicker of fear still tugged at her resolve. She tried to push it down as they approached the doll section once more. Miss Harper was there, standing near the display with a clipboard in hand. Her eyes flicked up when she saw them, and her lips tightened. "I thought I made myself clear earlier," she said, her tone sharp and clipped. Cora flinched at the words, but her father didn't react. He didn't raise his voice or scowl. Instead, he spoke with the kind of calm that made people stop and listen. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said, gesturing toward the doll. "My daughter came here to buy this. Is there a problem?" Miss Harper hesitated, glancing nervously at the growing number of shoppers who had started to take notice. "It's just that—" She faltered, but quickly recovered. "This is a premium item. We have policies about—" "Policies about what?" Snoop interrupted, his voice still level but edged with steel. Corey stood frozen, her heart pounding as the exchange unfolded. The store suddenly felt too quiet, as if everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Miss Harper took a step back, clutching her clipboard. "Perhaps I should speak to my manager." "You do that," Snoop said. But before she could leave, he turned to Corey and motioned for her to pick up the doll. She hesitated, afraid that doing so would trigger another confrontation, but her father gave her a reassuring nod. "It's yours," he said. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the smooth packaging. The moment she lifted the box, she felt the weight of Miss Harper's disapproval pressing down on her again. Miss Harper's voice sliced through the tension. "Stop right there." Corey froze, clutching the doll tighter. "You need to put that back," Miss Harper demanded. "I can't let you walk out of here with merchandise you haven't paid for." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. Corey's chest tightened, and for a moment it felt like the walls were closing in. "I wasn't stealing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Miss Harper didn't seem to hear or care. She stepped closer, reaching for the box, but Snoop stepped between them, his posture protective. "That's enough," he said, his voice no longer calm. "You don't get to treat my daughter like that." Miss Harper flinched but stood her ground. "I'll call security," she threatened. The words shattered something inside Corey. Until now, she had managed to hold back the tears, but the threat of being dragged out of the store like a criminal was too much. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything wrong." Her outburst echoed through the store, drawing even more attention. Other shoppers whispered among themselves, their gazes flicking between Corey, her father, and Miss Harper. Miss Harper reached for the doll again, but Snoop caught her wrist. "Don't touch her," he said, his voice low but firm. It was the kind of tone that silenced a room, and Miss Harper finally stepped back. But the damage had already been done. Corey's tears spilled over as she hugged the doll to her chest. "Let's go," Snoop said, gently guiding her toward the exit. The walk to the door felt endless. Corey's legs felt heavy, as if each step was weighed down by shame and anger. She wanted to disappear, to escape the prying eyes and judgmental whispers. Outside, the noise of the city hit her like a wave. She sucked in a shaky breath and wiped her face, but no amount of tears could wash away the humiliation she felt. Her father crouched down in front of her again, his eyes searching hers. "Listen to me," he said. "What happened in there? It's not on you. You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me?" She nodded, but the words didn't feel real yet. All she could think about was the way Miss Harper had looked at her, as if she didn't belong. Snoop straightened and pulled out his phone. Corey watched as he took a quick video of the store's entrance, then flipped the camera to face himself. "This is what discrimination looks like," he said, his voice steady but filled with restrained anger. "This is what my daughter just went through, and we're not staying quiet about it." He ended the recording and turned to Corey. "We're going to fix this," he promised. But Corey wasn't sure anything could fix the way she felt. The doll was still clutched tightly in her arms, but it no longer felt like a symbol of love and friendship. Instead, it felt like a reminder of everything she wasn't allowed to have without a fight. As her father led her back to the car, she stared down at the doll's braided hair and perfect features. It was supposed to be a gift, but now it felt like a burden. Corey didn't know what came next, but as the city blurred past the car windows, one thought refused to leave her mind. This wasn't over. The ride home was quiet. Corey sat in the passenger seat, the doll resting on her lap, her fingers tracing the edges of the box. The bright lights of the city blurred through the car window, but none of it felt real. It was as if the world outside was moving too fast while she was stuck in a moment she couldn't escape. Her father gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles tight, his usually relaxed demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. The weight of what had happened hung between them, unspoken but heavy. When they pulled into the driveway, Snoop cut the engine and turned to her. "We're not letting this go," he said. Corey nodded, though her stomach twisted at the thought of returning to that store. She wasn't sure she could face Miss Harper again, or the judgmental stares of the other shoppers. But as much as she wanted to bury the memory, she couldn't shake the anger simmering just beneath her fear. That night, her father spent hours on the phone. Corey sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but she caught snippets of his conversations, mentions of lawyers, reporters, and public statements. The tension in the room felt alive, and by the time she went to bed, her mind was racing. The next morning, she woke to find her father already dressed. He looked sharp, his suit pressed, and his sunglasses perched on his nose even though they were still indoors. His phone was buzzing non-stop, but he ignored it as he turned to Corey. "Let's go." She hesitated. "Back to the store?" "We're not just going back. We're making sure they never do this to anyone else." The drive downtown felt different this time. There was no music playing, no jokes to lighten the mood. Corey clutched the doll tightly, her palms sweating against the plastic. Her father's focus never wavered, his eyes locked straight ahead. When they arrived, the store looked just as imposing as it had the day before. The golden doors gleamed in the morning light, and Corey felt her chest tighten as they stepped inside. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Shoppers paused to stare, whispers rippling through the aisles as they recognized Snoop Dogg. But this time, Corey didn't feel invisible. She felt exposed. Miss Harper was behind the counter, her posture stiffening the moment she saw them. She quickly looked away, pretending to sort paperwork, but it was clear she had been expecting them. Snoop walked straight to the counter. "We need to talk." Miss Harper didn't look up. "You'll need to speak with the manager. Then get them." She hesitated before disappearing into the back. Corey glanced around the store, noticing how many people were now watching. Her father stayed calm, but Corey could feel the tension radiating off him. When the manager finally appeared, he was a tall man with graying hair and a polished suit. His smile was practiced but thin. "Mr. Broadus," he began, extending a hand that Snoop ignored. "I understand there was an incident yesterday, and I'd like to personally apologize." "Save it," Snoop interrupted. "I don't need apologies. I need accountability." The manager's smile faltered. "Of course, and we take these matters very seriously." "Do you?" Snoop cut in again. "Because my daughter was humiliated in your store. She was treated like a criminal for wanting to buy a doll, and we're not leaving until we see the security footage." Corey's heart skipped. The security cameras, she hadn't even thought about them. But now, the idea of having proof sent a surge of hope through her. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "I'll need to consult with our legal team before releasing any footage." "That's fine," Snoop said. "We'll wait." More shoppers had gathered by now, their murmurs growing louder. Corey could feel eyes on her, but this time it didn't feel as suffocating. Her father's presence anchored her, and she stood a little taller, clutching the doll as if it were a shield. It took nearly an hour before the footage was brought out. The manager led them to a small office in the back of the store, where a security guard played the recording on a monitor. Corey winced as the scene unfolded, the way Miss Harper looked her up and down, the sharpness of her words, and the moment she reached for the doll and accused Corey of stealing. Her father didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence in the room spoke louder than words. When the video ended, the manager cleared his throat. "I think we can all agree this behavior is unacceptable." "Unacceptable doesn't even cover it," Snoop snapped. "You can fire her, sure, but that's not enough. What's stopping the next person from walking in here and going through the same thing?" The manager looked flustered. "We're prepared to offer compensation." "I don't want your money," Snoop said. "I want change." The manager hesitated. "What do you propose?" Snoop turned to Corey. "This is your fight too," he said. "What do you think?" Corey's throat felt dry, but she forced herself to speak. I think you should make sure this doesn't happen again. Train your staff. Make them see what it's like to feel invisible." Her voice grew stronger. "And I think you should give back. Donate toys to kids who can't afford them. Make this place about more than just selling expensive stuff." The manager nodded slowly. "We'll take that into consideration." "You'll do more than consider it," Snoop said. "You'll do it, and we'll make sure everyone knows." By the time they left the store, Corey felt different. She wasn't sure if the changes would stick or if the store would follow through on its promises, but for the first time since the incident, she felt like she had taken back some control. Outside, reporters had already gathered. News of the confrontation had spread fast and cameras flashed as Snoop stepped forward to speak. Corey stayed by his side, the doll still in her arms, no longer a symbol of shame, but of resilience. Her father's voice boomed over the noise. "This isn't just about one store or one girl. This is about respect, and we're not stopping here." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time Corey felt hope. This wasn't over, but it was a start. And as she looked up at her father, she knew they were ready for whatever came next. The morning after their confrontation at the toy store, Corey woke up to the sound of voices coming from downstairs. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and glanced at her phone. Notifications flooded the screen. Comments, reposts, and messages. She scrolled through them, her heart pounding as she saw the words of support pouring in. Unacceptable behavior. Stay strong, Corey. This is why we need change. Thank you for speaking up. I've been through something like this too. No one should feel this way. She couldn't believe it. Her father's video had gone viral overnight. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People weren't just sympathizing, they were angry, furious. And that anger wasn't fading. Corey's door creaked open and Snoop peeked in, holding his phone to his ear. He gave her a thumbs up and mouthed, "You good?" She nodded, and he disappeared down the hall, his voice low but determined. He'd been on the phone non-stop since they left the store, and, from the little she overheard, things were moving fast. By the time Corey came downstairs, their living room had been transformed into something that looked more like a newsroom than a home. Reporters had gathered outside, their cameras and microphones pointed toward the front door. Inside, a laptop streamed the video on repeat, while Snoop's team huddled around phones and notepads, coordinating interviews and statements. Corey tried to stay out of the way, but as soon as her father saw her, he waved her over. "This is all you," he said, pointing to the screen. "You see this? You're making people pay attention." Corey swallowed hard. It didn't feel like her. It felt like someone else, someone braver. But as the comments continued to flood in, she started to believe it. Over the next few days, the momentum only grew. News outlets picked up the story, and hashtags like #EqualToys and #JusticeForCorey spread like wildfire. Celebrities weighed in, adding their voices to the call for accountability, and parents began sharing their own stories of discrimination. At first, Corey felt empowered. She scrolled through the messages, reading stories from people who had faced the same kind of treatment. It was comforting to know she wasn't alone, but it was also heartbreaking to see how many others had suffered in silence. Her father made sure they didn't stay silent. He gave interviews on national TV, demanding not only justice for Corey, but systemic change in the way stores train their employees. Corey even joined him for one interview, her voice shaking but steady as she explained what had happened. "It wasn't just about the doll," she said, clutching it tightly as the cameras rolled. "It was about being seen, being treated like I didn't belong, and no one should ever feel that way." The interview went viral, pushing the pressure even higher. The toy store released a formal apology, but it wasn't enough. People wanted more. 2 days later, the store announced that Miss Harper had been fired. Corey read the headline 3 times, but it didn't feel satisfying. Her father had warned her it wouldn't. "This ain't about one person losing a job," he said. "It's about fixing what let this happen in the first place." And that's exactly what they pushed for next. Under mounting pressure, the store's corporate office agreed to implement mandatory diversity training for all employees. They promised to create a scholarship fund for underprivileged children and to donate toys to local charities. It was more than Corey had expected, but her father wasn't done yet. "This isn't just their problem," he said during another interview. "This is a wake-up call for everybody. We can't just fix one store. We've got to fix the whole system." The words stuck with Corey. She thought about her best friend and how excited she'd been to give her the doll. But now, it didn't feel like enough to just hand over a gift. She wanted to do something bigger, something that would matter to more people. That night, she sat down with her father and laid out her idea. "What if we give away dolls?" she said. "Not just 1 or 2, but hundreds of them, to kids who need them, to kids who don't see themselves in the toys they have." Snoop's face lit up. "Now you're thinking big." The next morning, they announced their plan. Using the attention from the viral video, they launched a campaign to raise funds for the giveaway. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, and companies offered to match contributions. Within days, they had enough to fill a warehouse with dolls, books, and toys of every kind. Corey helped sort through the boxes, picking out the ones she thought her friend would love most. For the first time since the incident, she felt like she was doing something that mattered. The giveaway event was set for the following weekend, and the excitement surrounding it grew with each passing day. News outlets covered the preparations, volunteers signed up in droves, and families started lining up hours before the doors opened. On the morning of the event, Corey stood at the entrance, looking out at the crowd. It stretched down the block, filled with parents and children holding signs that read, "Thank you, Corey." She felt her father's hand on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning," he said. She nodded, wiping her palms against her jeans to steady her nerves. Then she took a deep breath and opened the doors. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Children ran from table to table, their eyes wide with wonder as they picked out their toys. Volunteers helped them pack their bags, while music played overhead, setting a festive tone. Corey walked through the crowd, handing out dolls and posing for pictures. Every smile, every thank you made her chest feel lighter. But it wasn't until she spotted a little girl clutching the same doll Corey had fought for that she truly felt the weight lift. The girl's braids matched the doll's, and her grin stretched from ear to ear as she twirled in place, showing off her new treasure. "Thank you," the girl said softly. Corey smiled back. "You're welcome." By the end of the day, hundreds of dolls had found new homes, but more importantly, the message had spread. This wasn't just about toys. It was about representation, respect, and the right to feel seen. As Corey helped clean up, her father pulled her aside. "Look around," he said. "You did this." She shook her head. "We did this." And for the first time since that awful day in the toy store, Corey felt something she hadn't expected: pride. The morning of the charity event arrived with the hum of excitement in the air. Corey stood by the window, watching the trucks unload boxes of toys and supplies in the parking lot of the community center. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables covered in colorful decorations and arranging rows of dolls, books, and games. It was hard to believe how far they had come in such a short time. The viral video had turned their story into a movement, but Corey knew this event wasn't just about toys. It was about the message they wanted to send, that every child deserved to feel seen, valued, and celebrated. She stepped away from the window and glanced at the doll that had started it all. It now sat on her dresser, still in its box, but no longer a symbol of humiliation. Instead, it reminded her of strength, the strength to stand up for herself and others. Her father's voice drifted up from downstairs. He was already on the phone, finalizing details with the press and coordinating with the security team. Even though this was meant to be a day of joy, he wanted to make sure nothing went wrong. Corey grabbed her jacket and headed downstairs, her pulse quickening as the noise from outside grew louder. Reporters had already gathered, their cameras pointed toward the entrance. She had done interviews before, but this felt different. This time it wasn't about what had happened to her, it was about what they were doing for others. Snoop looked up as she entered the room, giving her a reassuring nod. He was dressed sharp as always, his sunglasses reflecting the morning light. But when he spoke, his voice carried the warmth that always made her feel safe. "You ready for this?" Corey nodded. "Yeah, let's do it." They stepped outside together and the crowd erupted in cheers. Children waved from behind the barricades, their faces lit with excitement. Volunteers wore matching T-shirts with the words "Representation Matters" printed in bold letters, and banners with the same message hung from the tents. Corey tried to take it all in, but it felt overwhelming. She had dreamed of doing something big, but seeing it come to life was almost too much to process. The ceremony started with a short speech from her father, who thanked the community for their support and emphasized the importance of standing up against discrimination. Then he handed the microphone to Corey. She swallowed hard, her palms damp as she stepped forward. "Hi," she began, her voice trembling slightly before she steadied herself. "I just wanted to say thank you for being here today. This all started because of something bad that happened to me. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about every kid who's ever felt like they didn't belong." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "I want every kid to know that they do belong. And they deserve to see themselves in the world around them, in their schools, in their neighborhoods, and even in their toys." The crowd erupted into applause, and Corey stepped back, her heart racing but lighter than before. She had said what she needed to say. As the event kicked off, families streamed through the gates, their faces filled with anticipation. Volunteers handed out tickets that children could trade for toys, while others guided them through the tables to pick out their favorites. Corey walked through the crowd, stopping to help a little girl pick out a doll and showing another child how to assemble a toy car. She felt the tension she had carried for days start to melt away as she focused on the smiles around her. But even as she handed out toys, she couldn't stop thinking about what came next. The event was a success, but she didn't want it to end here. She wanted to keep the momentum going. Later in the afternoon, while the event was still in full swing, Corey and her father sat down with a reporter for a live interview. "This isn't just a one-time thing," Snoop said. "We're starting something bigger. We're working with other organizations to make sure this kind of discrimination gets called out and fixed, not just in stores, but everywhere." The reporter turned to Corey. "What's been the most rewarding part of today?" Corey thought for a moment before answering. "Seeing the smiles," she said, "and knowing that kids are leaving here feeling like they matter." By the time the sun began to set, the event was winding down. Volunteers packed up the remaining toys, and families headed home, their arms full of gifts and their hearts full of gratitude. Corey stood near the entrance, watching the last few children pick out their dolls. One little girl, no older than 6, clutched a doll that looked just like her. She turned to Corey with wide eyes and said, "She looks like me." Corey smiled. "That's because she's perfect, just like you." As the crowd thinned, Snoop joined her by the entrance. "You did good today," he said. Corey looked up at him, the weight of everything they'd been through settling into something closer to pride. "We did good," she replied. But even as the event came to a close, Corey knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. She had seen what was possible when people came together, and she wasn't about to let that momentum fade. That night, as she lay in bed, she scrolled through the pictures and videos from the event. The smiles, the laughter, the sheer joy. It was more than she had hoped for. But one comment stood out. "This isn't just about toys. It's about showing kids they matter. Don't stop now." She didn't plan to. The night after the charity event, Corey lay awake in her bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of traffic outside. Her mind buzzed with images from the day, The lines of smiling kids, the hugs, the laughter. She felt proud, but also restless. She rolled onto her side and reached for the doll that had started it all. It sat on her nightstand, still in its box, but no longer just a symbol of the pain she had experienced. Now it felt like a reminder of everything she had accomplished. She traced her fingers along the edges of the packaging, thinking about the girls who had walked away from the event holding dolls that looked like them. But even as the memories of the day filled her with pride, another thought crept in. What happened next? The charity event had been a success, but would it really change anything? Or would it all fade away once the news cycle moved on? The next morning, Corey came downstairs to find her father already in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. The television was on in the background, playing clips from the event. She paused, watching a segment that showed a little girl clutching her new doll and smiling shyly at the camera. "That one gets me every time," Snoop said without looking up. Corey slid into the seat across from him. "What if it's not enough?" Her father finally looked up. "What do you mean?" "What if people forget? What if nothing really changes after this?" Snoop set his phone down and leaned forward. "Baby girl, change doesn't happen overnight. What we did yesterday, that was big. But it's just one step. You don't stop walking after one step, do you?" Corey shook her head. "Exactly. So we keep moving." Corey let his words sink in as she thought about the next step. She didn't want this to be the end. She wanted it to be the start of something bigger, something that lasted. Later that day, her father called a meeting with his team. Corey sat beside him as they discussed ideas for building on the momentum. Social media was still buzzing, and more organizations had reached out, offering to partner with them for future projects. One suggestion stood out: a campaign to provide schools and libraries with dolls, books, and toys that reflected diversity. It wouldn't just be about giveaways. It would be about creating spaces where kids could see themselves represented every day. Corey's eyes lit up at the idea. We could call it See Me. The name stuck. Over the next few weeks, Corey and her father threw themselves into the project. They worked with toy companies to design new dolls, reached out to schools about adding inclusive toys to their classrooms, and even began developing educational programs to help teachers address diversity. Corey spoke at events, sharing her story and encouraging others to speak up when they faced discrimination. She was nervous at first, but each time she stood in front of a crowd, her voice grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every kid who had ever felt invisible. The project gained traction quickly. Donations poured in, and schools across the country signed up to be part of the program. News outlets continued to cover their progress, and celebrities used their platforms to spread the message. But not everyone supported the movement. Critics accused them of stirring up unnecessary controversy and pushing an agenda. Corey tried to ignore the negative comments, but some of them stung. She couldn't understand why people were so resistant to something that seemed so simple: treating others with kindness and respect. One night, after reading through a particularly harsh thread of comments online, Corey broke down. Her father found her sitting on the couch, tears streaming down her face. "I thought we were doing something good," she said. "We are," Snoop replied, sitting beside her. "But not everyone's ready for it. Some people don't like seeing the truth, and they'll fight to keep things the way they are. That doesn't mean we stop." Corey wiped her eyes and nodded. She wasn't going to let the negativity win. By the time the first shipment of toys arrived at a local school, the project had become bigger than she had ever imagined. Teachers sent photos of students playing with the dolls and reading books that reflected their cultures and experiences. Parents shared stories about how their kids felt more confident and proud of who they were. Corey visited one of the schools herself, walking through the classrooms and watching as children eagerly reached for the new toys. One little girl ran up to her, holding a doll with braided hair and a dress that matched her own. "She looks just like me," the girl said, her eyes shining. Corey smiled, remembering how she had felt the first time she saw the doll in the store. "She does. And she's beautiful, just like you." By the time they left the school, Corey felt lighter. She could see the difference they were making, and it gave her hope that the momentum wouldn't stop. But the biggest surprise came a few weeks later. The toy store that had started it all announced that it was relaunching its doll collection with a focus on diversity. They had partnered with artists and designers to create dolls that reflected a wide range of cultures, body types, and abilities. They also pledged to donate a portion of their profits to Corey's campaign. Corey couldn't believe it when she saw the announcement. "You did that," her father said. "You made them see what they were missing." As the months passed, the campaign continued to grow. Corey spoke at conferences, appeared on talk shows, and even started planning a children's book inspired by her story. She never forgot how it all started, with a simple dream to make her friend feel seen. One evening, as she sat in her room sketching ideas for the book, she looked over at the doll on her dresser. It was still in its box, but now it felt like a symbol of something much bigger than herself. She picked it up and smiled. This was just the beginning. If you like this story, support our channel. Subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends. Check out our other videos for more inspiring and important stories.